I'm Brent Challis. This recording is of demonstrations which were designed to go with the webinar Why Windows PowerShell Will Be Part of Your Future that DDLS ran recently. The demonstrations are designed not to be standalone, they're designed to be viewed and looked at and reviewed in conjunction with the content that was covered in the webinar itself. I'd like to leap in and start with one of the very important parts at the very beginning of the webinar. The concept that when PowerShell is working with objects. It's a critical part of what we're doing. Everything we work with in PowerShell is an object. If I have some text, say just a piece of string, it is not just a collection of characters, which is what it looks like there. It is in fact an object in its own right. And I feed that into a command called getMember. I can see just how complex it is. Now you'll see while almost all of it is about methods, this is functionality. These are things that an object can do to itself. I can do a lot of processing on a string object. It actually only has one property, which is the length property. So if I say I want to find out what that property value is, I can put in my objects, dot, and the property I want, and I can get the answer to one of the great questions of all time. How long is a piece of string? 17. So you know immediately it's 17 characters. Now, a critical part of knowing that it is actually an object is understanding why the pipeline works, or simply how it works so effectively. When a command that does its job, it puts objects out into the pipeline, which means the next command down the pipeline can pick these objects up, examine them, and work with them. And this is extremely powerful. For example, if I say get process, what I will get is a collection of process objects. I can see that I've got this by once again piping into getMember, or using its alias of GM. And what I see is I have a collection of things which are of type system.diagnostics.process. These means that each of these objects represents a process running on my computer. I can call the methods on it, such as the kill method, to make it shut itself down, or I can view its properties to find out more about it. But more importantly, because it is actually an object, I can pipe it into other commands, such as if I use sort object. This is a command that can take a collection of objects and actually sort them into some sort of shape. But because I'm dealing with a property which could be an object of any sort object needs to know which property value should it be reading. It doesn't know how to do things like screen scraping. It just says, give me the name of the property that I have to read and I will process it. So for example, if I say property name, I get an alphabetical listing of all of the objects. And it is that functionality which is huge in terms of making the pipeline work. PowerShell is also a shell that can simply do the work that we did with other shells for running commands and external utilities. For example, if I want to, I can run ping, and you'll see that ping will work in exactly the same way that ping works in cmd.exe. Now, there are often though going to be command utilities, PowerShell utilities, which will be similar functionality, such as I have test connection, and that will return something very, very similar. Going into the .NET framework, picking up the ping type objects, and it will produce a result of doing the same task that ping did. However, because it is a PowerShell command, it's been written, I suppose, in a slightly more friendly way, which means I can do a bit more with it. And in particular, if I look at the different arguments or parameters that I can feed into it, one of them is count. Now, ping also has a count option, but one of them, which is particularly nice, is quiet. If I use the quiet switch, that tells test connection to check that this ping gets a response, but rather than displaying data on it, it just simply returns true or false to say, was the last ping I did successful? This makes test connection extremely useful in scripts if you want to check that a server or another machine is actually online before you try accessing it. Now, in the webinar I said that everything that you do in cmd.exe you can in fact do in PowerShell. I also said there were a couple of quirks. It isn't quite the same. For example, if I do dir, it appears to work. Now the reason that that's appearing to work is that dir is an alias for a command which is get child item. But unlike dir, which is an internal command inside the cmd.exe shell, the get child connection is actually a PowerShell command, so it works in the PowerShell way. And it's designed to accept command line parameters with a hyphen. So if I try to do what I'm used to from cmd.exe and do a dir/s, one of the catches I have is it'll fail because that's not how PowerShell works. So what I have to do is use the PowerShell equivalent, which is recurse. And that would actually go down through all the subdirectory structures to show me all the information that was in there. So that's a slight aside in the sense that cmd.exe is not a standard command or standard program that's written on our system. Now, a lot of the programs we work with are in fact utilities that we use. A lot of what we think of as commands in our DOSBox or cmd.exe will in fact be commands from our system. Now, some of those are somewhat complex, and because they are complex, they don't quite work. For example, if I try to use iCackles, one of the issues with this is it has a very complex command line for it. You can see it, you might hopefully see a slight red squiggle there which says that PowerShell ISE is saying, I don't quite understand this. A big part of this is because of that colon that's in here. PowerShell accepts that we have drive letters or drive names which are bigger than just letters and sees the colon as an indicator of what's reported as a drive. So that's quite a complex system. So if I were to try running that, it would fail because it simply tries to interpret that and iCackles doesn't understand what's going on as a result. If you do have something which is like that, you can still run it, but what you have to do is tell PowerShell not to interpret what follows. So if I run that with a %, I'm telling PowerShell everything that follows after this is to be handed straight to that executable and just processed, not interpreted. When I run that, the utility runs. It's an important part of how PowerShell works. So yes, we can do anything in PowerShell that we could do in cmd.exe, but there may be a couple of catches and a couple of hooks. So, having had a look at that, have a look at some of the other common work that we'll be doing, particularly important as you start to learn PowerShell. There are a small group of commands that you will use frequently, and I say this not because I think that this is something you'll do when you're learning, but you'll use it forever. And I say that on the basis that I've been using PowerShell since it was pre-release when it was called Monad, and I still use these. There's a command called get command. If you want to know what command you should be using, get PowerShell to tell you. I can use get command to go looking through all of the commands that exist on the system that it knows about and say, give me anything with process in the name. Anywhere in the name. Now we know that according to PowerShell, all our commands should be verb-noun, and so I could actually go and search by the verb as well. And if you want to know what verbs you should be looking for, there's a PowerShell command for that as well. If I run get command, that shows me all the commands, but if I run get verb, I can see what are considered acceptable verbs. Now, if you write your own commands, you can actually use any verb that you want to. The thing is that if you make your own up, use verbs which aren't on this list, people coming to your team from outside may struggle to find the commands that you've written. So good practice says you should always use one of these verbs. Having found the command that you want, you can ask for how it works by using get help. The command I want is get process, but rather than just showing it in the console window at the bottom, open up a separate window as a dialog to show it there so I can read it more clearly. And one of the advantages too is if you have a multi-monitor system, such as I have here when it opened up on one of the other monitors, you can have this on one monitor so you can read it to work out how it's meant to work, and you can cut and paste from it into your PowerShell monitor. So get command will help you find the commands you need to use. Get help will explain how you use them. Having used it, you've got to then work out what's it giving you. And I can use get process to get my processes. If I want to know what on earth I've got my hands on, though, I can use get member as you sort of have a look at it. And so I can read in detail what the properties and methods are. And that grid view is also one that I believe is also particularly useful. It's just simply a display thing. That puts the output into a grid, which is like a large dialog box. And one of the advantages with this is I can search on this as well. So I can look for anything, anywhere across the line, and it'll bring it up. Or if I've got multiple columns, I can in fact do it the easy way and say, well actually I can search by little bits of it. So what I want is all of the properties. So I say give me all of the entries that came back where the member type contains prop. So I can just focus in on the property. Out grid view, very useful command, very useful for displaying, a bit of a GUI type feel to it, and you'll, I believe, will also use that frequently. Because of this ability to work with objects, we also get this great functionality out of the pipeline. Now I'm going to get my process objects, I'm going to sort them on the property virtual memory, descending, so the largest numbers at the top. Then I'm going to select from the objects, I'm only going to select the first 5. That means I get to see the 5 most memory hungry processes running on my machine. Good, very common, I suppose, the standard bits of your toolkit. I think of these as being in your toolbox. When you open up the lid, this is on the top shelf of it. These are the ones that you will get out frequently to help you work with the system. Another important part of PowerShell is that it is context agnostic. And by that I mean it doesn't matter where you are, the command should work in the same way. If I use dir, you've already seen that gives me a directory listing of the file system. That's simply the default setting. I can though go to other places. Remember I mentioned the colon with an indicator of a drive name before it, so I'm going to go to the search drive. If I do that, I can see I'm now on the search drive. If I do a dir in here, what I'm doing, which is get child item, I get to see a list of all of the certificates that are in the store. I can also go into the registry, go into the local machine hive. From there I can go to a particular substructure on there, and once again dir on that works the way that we would expect, and it will go searching through that structure. If I have SQL Server installed, I will also get a SQL Server drive. Now this means now I'm connecting to the context of the SQL Server installation. From here I can change, as you see I've already got it here. I've actually gone down into what looks like a file structure. One thing getting edged by CD. And if I do a dir on here, in this case I'll throw it to that grid view again, what I get to see are all the subchilds of the tables node. In other words, here's a list of all of the tables that exist in this particular database. So this is a particularly powerful part of the system, and that what it's designed to do is to give me the ability to work across any context. And a huge part of this is it means that when people come up with new technologies, if they provide things called PS providers and PS for them, we can connect those data stores and interrogate those using a common metaphor. This includes the environment space. So I can see things such as what the content of the path variable is. Because of PowerShell has the functions by actually putting PowerShell commands in memory, I can go to the function drive, and from there I can see all the functions that are currently in memory. I can also see what variables have currently been set up and what their values are. So I can use this for interrogating a huge amount of my system as well. So a really critical part of this is the flexibility it gives for the future. New technologies developed, so long as the providers are written for it as well, PowerShell can keep just connecting up to them, and the commands are written to be agnostic, which is also, I suspect, why some of the names are somewhat strange. PowerShell 2 gave us the ability to have modules written in PowerShell scripting languages, but also in DLLs and .NET code as well, but in particular this concept of the module for deployment. And one of the things that Microsoft gave us was an Active Directory module. So if you want to work with AD, we use the Active Directory module, and we can start to interrogate AD very easily from the command line. I've got get AD user, so if I want to find out information about a user on the system, here is all of the information from that user object. And of course what I'm seeing here of the property names are the real property names, not the slightly friendly versions of them that may have appeared through things like, for example, Active Directory computers and users. I can use this, type that in conjunction with OutGridView. OGV is the alias for OutGridView, and that gives me the ability to see all of the users that are in there. I can look for any detail that's in there across the line, or I might say, okay, I want to now set this up and find information by, say, possibly using given name, the same account name, the surname, and I want a list of all of the users who have Ken in their given name, for example. So that makes it that simple to start looking into Active Directory and interrogating it without having to use Active Directory using computers. I can also get all the computer objects using the filter, the LDAP filtering on there, and I can define the search path on there. So if I want to get a quick idea about what computers are assigned to the Australia OU, I get all the computer objects back. And what I'm getting are objects. Equally, great functionality. I can search AD account. I only want user objects, but I want all of those which have been tagged as logged out. Great way to check who's going to be phoning you on Monday morning when they come in, because they found they've somehow managed to lock their account out over the weekend. A lot of functionality from the Active Directory module, huge power, and so many of the other technologies that are being put in place as well have modules to support their use. With also taking the next jump within PowerShell, you've seen how I can use OutGrid View as a very crude bit of, I suppose, GUI, but I can also write GUIs in PowerShell. This particular utility is written completely in PowerShell. It looks like a Windows application. It actually loaded it from a .exe because the utility I use, the commercial product called delivered by Sappium called PowerShell Studio, gives me the ability to package my scripts into .exe. There are a lot of tools that will do that, including a lot of free tools. But one of the things which is kind of awkward, if you want to provide a GUI tool, it takes a lot of work to code it directly in PowerShell, because you have to specify absolutely everything down to a pixel, which becomes extremely difficult. But in this utility, I've had it so I can see all my locked out accounts. I can also unlock them from here. I can look to see which accounts have already expired. I can check to see which accounts are disabled. Which accounts have passwords which are going to expire in the near future, within the next month, that's how I've set it up. Accounts which have been inactive. This is a demo, Active Directory, where the users don't actually log in, so they're all inactive. But the idea here is you could very easily find out which accounts have not logged onto the domain in the last 3 months. And then you've got to work out, is there something wrong with the machine if it's a computer that hasn't logged in, say one of your servers? Or check to find out, is a user on sabbatical, is a user left? Have you still got a user machine and that user hasn't logged in? Which accounts have passwords that don't expire? Something that your auditors may be very interested in. The thing I'm trying to show here is that I can produce an interface that looks just like a Windows application. For the simple reason it is. To be able to do that, what I did was use a tool called PowerShell Studio. So if I come back up here. So it's a commercial product, but it's a bit like Visual Studio, where it produces PowerShell as the language. The advantage I have with this is that I can drag and drop all of the UI elements, and PowerShell Studio will write all of the PowerShell code that's needed to work in the background to make that interface work. So if I'll just drag that down so we can see what it looks like. That's the interface that I had, the different boxes. If I want to see what else I can add to it on the toolbox, here are all of the user interface elements that I can just simply drag and drop. If I move them around, it writes the PowerShell behind there to make those changes work. If I want to have some functionality behind that button, I can double click on it and it just takes me to a stub that it writes of PowerShell to make it all work. So I don't have to do the UI or any of the wiring. Most of the work that I've done in here, in terms of getting this information, exists in this chunk here. Getting all of the account information that I want, adding it onto the list boxes for display, checking out the administrator information. Most of the work I probably did in about 200 lines of code. The actual script that's produced is about 1,000 lines of code. PowerShell Studio is the piece that's doing all of the hard work, all of that heavy lifting for me. Particularly useful, particularly powerful. And so we can make our GUIs work in exactly the same way command line GUIs work. And PowerShell can be extended. We can make huge changes to it. We can personalize it, we can write our own functionality to make it work. And this is where the real beauty of it is, because it means you can set it up to do exactly what you need for your environment. This particular code here Once again, going back to get process. If I run that, I get a list of all the processes that start with the letter P. What I want to do though is produce a little bit of a report, so I'm going to convert it to HTML. But in this case, I've written a variation on the convert to HTML. I don't like the default behavior. I prefer to have borders around my table cells, and also like having alternate colors in the different rows to make it easier to read. I want to output that HTML somewhere to save it, so I'm just quickly creating a temporary file. This is once again a variation on a standard command. I've modified or put a wrapper around the out file command. There's an entry I think on my blog, the beachellis.wordpress.com blog, explaining how I did that. I want my temporary file though to have an extension of HTML so it works with the browser, and I'm going to open it up. So if I run that line, so hopefully that will run out and I will get an HTML file produced which is like a report. Particularly useful. Other ways that I can also use that is in the webinar I made mention of a young guy who just started using PowerShell, new to it, had a scenario where he was told that a few of the servers that they had weren't running one of the security services, which was crucial to the integrity of their system, and he was told to find out how many weren't working and fix the problem. First thing he had to do was find out which ones weren't doing it. He believed PowerShell would be the solution, so he worked with a PowerShell MVP to get the code up and running to make it work. And in half a day he found out what machines weren't running the service, deployed the code to the ones that needed extra code, and had it all running up. To give you a bit of an idea, I suppose, an approach for that, I'd like to show you a sample that I've written, which is identifying also a couple of the new things within PowerShell 5. On top of the changes of scripting language which we've had slowly over the years, PowerShell 5 gives us two major changes. One of them is the ability to define an enumeration. If I wanted to store a value for the status of a computer, I could just simply have a text or a piece of string in there, which means I could write online or offline. The difficulty with that is that technically you could have any text written in there. By creating an enumeration, so one of the new things in PowerShell 5, I can define an enumeration called computer status, and the only values it will ever have are online or offline. To gather information on the different servers I want to connect to, I'm creating an object of my own definition. Now, for a long time we've had the new object, then I could create a PS object, so it's a custom object, but it was a little bit messy to work with when you had to add functionality to it, and wasn't particularly clean in the way it worked within the script. If I use a class as a way of doing it, I can add variables in here. When you create a variable, you'll automatically get a property created so that you can access that variable. If you declare it as hidden, that means if you send the object to getMember, it won't display it. But if you use the -force switch, it will. So it's not the same as encapsulating data, which is what most object-oriented programmers are used to. I've got the ability to initialize because I create what are called constructors, and these constructors can build the object for me, and I can add my own functionality in it. But the part which I think is particularly nice with this is that somebody could write the class. You don't have to know all of the details, you use it like any other objects that are going. I have a function now which will look at what machines I want to look at, also the services I'm interested in, iterate through them, and create one of my report objects for each of them with the details which are on there. But in terms of using it, and I'll just put that function into memory, I can feed in a collection of names and run it through this, which will actually then say I'm going to check all of those servers or machines for these services to see if they're running. And just to make it a little bit easier to understand, I'm going to create an out-grid view to display it. You can read it, and following on this whole pipeline idea whereby I can keep passing information down, you can select the entries out of the out-grid view that you want to make a report on, convert them to HTML, send them to a temporary file, and then have a look at the file to see what was going on. So if I want to have a quick look at this. Now, one of the things with this approach that I think is particularly poor though is I'm hard coding servers. If you ever want to work with machines in your Active Directory, the logical thing, of course, is to ask Active Directory for the information. And the second example I have of this is go to AD, give me all of the computers. Oh, here comes the reply, so I'm actually going up through those servers. Found these ones were online. These are the services I was looking for. Finding out that the servers were there, but also then finding about the services themselves, whether they're stopped, whether they're running, or when I used the get service, it actually didn't find anything to be able to tell you whether it's stopped or running or what its status is. So I've classed that as saying that means it hasn't been installed on that machine. So that would identify a particular problem if you knew the services should have been there. If I said, okay, I want to create a quick report on these, so I'll only look at the ones which are online. I'll now know I've got a machine which I should look at and track down, see whether it is or why it's offline. If I click on OK, the ones I've selected will now be passed to that convert to CC/HTML and a web page generated so that I can see a quick report on what's going on. Just a way of extending the functionality of seeing a little bit of PowerShell 5 with enumerations and classes and seeing how we work through the system. So that's a quick run through of hopefully some informative and interesting demonstrations. If you want any further information about what's been in this demonstration or what was in the webinar itself, please contact your account managers. I'll be able to help you through most of it. If they've got any queries which need to come through to me, they'll then pass them through to me and hopefully I'll be able to answer back to you via them as well. Hope these have been useful to you. Hope you've enjoyed seeing the demonstrations. And the big thing, hopefully you've got some ideas on some of the playing that you can do, because after all I believe strongly that the only way to learn PowerShell is through your fingertips. You've got to code it. So just try it. Some of the code that's in there, some of the code that's on the blog postings which are just coming up leading into the PowerShell competition that DDLS is running again, have been done because I need to do a bit of work and I thought I'll use PowerShell to get things achieved for me. Thank you for your time.